Welcome to the Sage Solutions podcast, where we talk about all things personal growth, personal development, and becoming your best self. My name is David Sage, and I am a self-worth and confidence coach at Sage Coaching Solutions. Today's episode is actually the second topic in a series that we're calling the 5 Core Fundamentals. It's about 5 core fundamental beliefs that I feel fit together in a way and are the primary factors that shape the way that I view the world and coach my clients. If you remember the episodes Perspectives of Reality Parts 1 and 2, that was the first topic of the 5 core fundamentals. The second is today's, Shades of Gray, or Thinking in Shades of Gray. Today, I'm lucky to be joined by the second of our 2 reoccurring co-hosts. You might remember her as our first ever guest from the episode Taking Action with Hannah Sage. So let me reintroduce my wife, Hannah Sage.
Hey guys, ready for round 2? I'm excited to sit back and relax a little bit while I help steer this conversation as your co-host today.
But before we get into it, our goal with this podcast is to share free, helpful tools with you and anyone you know who is looking to improve their life. So take action, subscribe, and share this podcast with them.
All right, let's start at the beginning. What does it mean to think in shades of gray?
Shades of gray thinking is about finding the shades of gray in anything that you're looking at. It's a mindset or perspective. In fact, I would say it's one of the most helpful perspectives that I have. It helps me learn and grow. I don't think we can really understand shades of gray thinking without talking about binary bias. Binary bias is a cognitive bias that we all have. It's where we view the world as black or white, all or nothing, up or down, hot or cold, good or bad, wrong or right. The reason that this is considered a cognitive bias is because it's not really the way that the world works for the most part. Something is only considered a cognitive bias if it means that we see the world regularly in a certain way based on that cognitive bias because of our evolutionary upbringing and just the way that our brains work that departs from how things actually are. In reality, most things in life are shades of gray. For the sake of picturing it, view everything as on a scale. At the 2 polar extreme ends, you have absolute black and absolute white. Everything in between those 2 is technically a shade of gray.
So would that basically be like reading in between the lines?
Yeah, exactly. It's finding where things actually are on that continuum or spectrum from black to white.
I'm sure we can all say that we suffer from seeing things too black and white. I know that I absolutely have. And I continue to do so pretty often. I try definitely to see the shades of gray, but in the moment when you're feeling either kind of like stuck or something is really hard to ignore, sometimes I can jump to the black and white. I'm saying that I want to have the house clean. Sometimes I can jump to where it has to be very clean. Like my clean standards are like it's either clean, or to heck with it. It doesn't really matter. And then it can be kind of like messy. But then I beat myself up for it not being that high standard of clean that I want it. Even though it might be just a couple tiers lower than that, it's mostly clean. There's not really anything pressing, no weird smells. Like, should be good. But it's not clean.
Yeah, this is actually a really great example. So when you view things in absolutes or extremes like that, it puts you in a position where you're either there or you're not. It doesn't give you the flexibility of like, hey, I made progress. It is significantly more clean, especially if you only had so much time to do it. If you're viewing it as the binary of clean or messy, then it invalidates all of the work that you did cleaning and disempowers you from doing partial cleaning in the future because it feels like it didn't matter. Like nothing you did mattered because it's all or nothing. And those extremes can be really harmful when you get caught up in that type of thinking.
More often than not, I think it's setting you up for failure and disappointment.
Yes, because the binary bias makes you feel like everything has to be this dichotomy. And it's all in extremes. If you're not meeting that extreme, then you're not acknowledging it.
So by using the example of having a clean house, by being able to look at that in shades of gray and say, okay, maybe it's not perfectly clean, but it's a lot cleaner, or it's still giving yourself the credit for the work that you've already done, as opposed to, oh, you didn't get it all done today, what a waste. Instead of saying, you know what, I've done a lot of work today, maybe I didn't get it as much as I wanted to, but I got a lot done and a lot accomplished. It gives yourself a chance to give yourself grace.
You don't want to discredit the 3 hours of work that you did do.
So besides using shades of gray thinking to give yourself grace, or even acknowledging your efforts when they are less than perfect, what are some other examples or uses of thinking in shades of gray?
There are plenty of different ways that shades of gray thinking can be incredibly helpful. I think that using it to give yourself grace or to acknowledge less than perfect efforts is a really great use of this type of thinking, but I find that there are 3 main things that it tends to accomplish, and a lot of times it is accomplishing multiple of these at the same time, and things like giving yourself grace kind of fall into a mixture of them. But the 3 things that shades of gray thinking accomplishes the best are, number 1, accuracy. Using shades of gray thinking is a way of finding exactness or having the most accuracy that you can about a topic by finding the nuance and all of the hidden little parts that you know exactly how it works. Not just rounding it up to a black or a white way of looking at it, finding all of the small little details so that you have a full understanding of where on that spectrum it falls. It also gives you flexibility, the flexibility to not be stuck in a dichotomy, to give yourself more options, the flexibility to give yourself credit, and the flexibility to give yourself grace. The last one is about finding balance. Often, people view things as either or, but there are many times that 2 things can be true at the same time. So, shades of gray thinking can be about finding the balance between those 2.
So by taking the time to view your accomplishments or view different points with a lens of accuracy will actually kind of not really allow room for exaggeration and dramatics.
It's actually a very good point. You are more likely to evaluate other things or even yourself more accurately.
Right, like coming from someone who does exaggerate a lot, most of my conversation is exaggerated by some point, whether it be funnier, sadder, happier. There's usually an exaggeration involved. But
Sure.
by taking that out, you're able to actually get an accurate representation and like see where you actually stand on something.
Yeah, it's really helpful when you're trying to have a good awareness of something. When you're trying to understand situational awareness, self-awareness, emotional awareness, all these things are going to be on scales of this shades of gray, black and white thinking. And sometimes it's very fine details that make the difference. So using shades of gray thinking to find that nuance, find the caveats or contingencies or the small details so that you fully understand it and understand that it's not fully one thing or another can really, really be helpful.
Man, I'm going to need a new go-to phrase when I'm talking about things because I tend to go to everything this or anything that.
Yeah, what you're talking about is absolutes. It's when people use, absolutes in statements. I will never do that again. I always do this.
Guilty.
Those are rarely true because they're infinitives. They mean that there is no room for any exception for any... Actually, that's a good one. Exceptions are a big thing in shades of gray. Just understanding that there are times where something doesn't apply, definitely a part for accuracy, and definitely can be a part for flexibility in a situation where you're like, oh God, this doesn't feel right, but it's normally right. Anyways, we're not trying to really get into like right and wrong and like moral code.
So with that, hearing the phrase that someone is morally gray, that's not what we're talking about today, is it?
Oh God, no. I am not saying that you should be morally gray. I suppose you could use shades of gray to figure out that a character in a show is morally gray. Like Deadpool, for instance, helps people but also does things that are definitely considered bad. No, I'm not arguing that this should lead you down a road of being morally gray, or that that's the ideal. This is more about learning and being able to evaluate things so that you have that extra accuracy, flexibility, and balance so that you see things more clearly, and then you can make better decisions or understand things more clearly. It's just an incredibly useful way of thinking about things, and erring on the side that most things are shades of gray is very helpful. It keeps us grounded in reality. It keeps us seeing things as they really are.
That is very interesting. However, I've got to say, this whole time, for years, I've just seen Shades of Grey as being a super sexy book.
Okay, I've never read the book and I've never seen the movies. So I'm definitely not the best person to comment on that. What I will say is my understanding is that the book is named that because it's the main character's last name, but that it's also about how his personality comes in a bunch of different shades of gray and the complexity of who he is as a character. So I guess in some ways it kind of does relate.
Oh, yeah. The main point of the book is his personality.
Anyways.
I know we brought up Star Wars in the last podcast that I was on, and David did his lovely Yoda impersonation.
Oh, boy.
But my boy Obi-Wan Kenobi, he knows something about absolutes, doesn't he?
He does. I believe it was Star Wars Episode 3, when Anakin says to Obi-Wan that Obi-Wan must be his enemy if he is not his ally. Then Obi-Wan responds, only a Sith deals in absolutes, which is an absolute in and of itself because he says only. But that's besides the point. What he's trying to say is that when you take things to their extremes, it often leads you down a path that is not a path you want to be going down.
Right. Like that path is going to be filled with shortcomings and feeling like you're not good enough.
And it just gets to a point where he pulls it into a pure dichotomy. If you're not helping me with what I'm doing, then you're my enemy and I must cut you down. It's just a dangerous line of thinking. It allows you to rationalize things that you really shouldn't rationalize. And it means when it comes to absolutes, when it comes to infinitives, that all or nothing type of thinking, question those. Take a pause when you hear those types of statements. Take a pause when you're about to say one of those statements. And actually, audit, hey, is this true? Is this all the time? Am I presenting it like something is all the time when there are clearly obvious exceptions?
Now, you've used the term dichotomies a couple times now. I think I know what that means, but it's not one that I hear in everyday language. Could you just touch base on what you mean when you say dichotomies?
Yeah, that's fair. A dichotomy is two opposing things or two opposing forces or two opposing ideas. It's opposite ends of a spectrum. From this to this, it's things that are pitted against each other. A dichotomy would be yes and no. They're opposites, and they mean opposing things.
Perfect. Thank you.
Speaking of extremes, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, the poison is in the dose.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have. But what does that have to do with Shades of Grey?
That's a good question. This is one of the ways that I evaluate extremes to find shades of gray, by remembering that the poison is in the dose. What it means in medicine is that there is no substance on the planet that isn't toxic in a high enough dose. Not even water, not even oxygen. Anything in a high enough dose or in the wrong place can kill you or be incredibly toxic to your body. There is such a thing as water poisoning, and no, it's not just drowning. You can actually be poisoned by the amount of water that you drank. Now, to bring this back around, more of a good thing is not always a good thing. Too much of a good thing can become a bad thing. The poison is in the dose. So, finding where on that spectrum it's as good of a thing as it can be before it starts getting bad can be using shades of gray thinking. Figuring out where the boundaries lie of different things and making sure that you're not overdoing something just because it's a good thing can help you find the accuracy and the balance. Now, on the flip side, small doses of bad things can be a good thing for your body. It's actually a process called hormesis, where you subject your body to small stressors like heat or exercise or fasting or cold. In fact, a lot of supplements and medications utilize hormesis. Put a stress on your body takes that stress, it's not overloaded by it because it's a small dose, and then it uses that with the process of hormesis to come back stronger than it was before, to adapt, creating a positive or beneficial effect for your body. There are many things in life that are like that. So, once again, the poison is in the dose.
So with all these upsides already, why don't more people think in shades of gray?
It's because black and white thinking is easy and it's comfortable. It doesn't require nearly as much thought. And it's comfortable to just judge things quickly and move on. Also, I would say it's because of the binary bias, which predisposes us to think that way. So we have to be actively confronting one of our biases to do shades of gray thinking. It's not the easiest thing. It's not the most natural thing, but it is incredibly useful. Now, the binary bias is not actually the only bias that is relevant when we are talking about shades of gray thinking. Another one is actually called the halo effect.
And not the Beyonce song, right?
No, not the Beyonce song. That was actually written by your favorite artist, wasn't it?
Yep, LP.
Okay, back on track. The halo effect removes shades of gray from people. Why? How? Well, it's where you tend to take one trait about a person, whether it's positive or negative, and project or extrapolate that onto them, onto their entire being. So let's say I think you're funny, and I really like how funny you are.
Thanks.
The halo effect would have me project the positive emotion of how funny you are onto your entire being. I would always see you as a funny person in almost every context, and I would see you as a good person, and I would see you as a kind person, and all of the other things that I consider good, because I've put this halo of good based on one trait over you that now colors the entire way that I see you.
Well, that's okay.
Well, yes, it's not always bad when it's in a positive light for someone like that. There can be some upsides to that, but it also means that you can ignore really toxic traits that people are doing towards you just because you're blinded by a halo effect.
Can the halo effect also be the opposite?
I would say that the bigger problem is when you use the halo effect on a negative trait towards somebody. This is all subconscious. You're doing it without thinking about it. If somebody has a trait that's pronounced that annoys you or that you really don't like, it's very easy to project that negative feeling about that one trait onto their entire being. And all of a sudden, you just can't stand this person and everything they do is wrong. And it's just like, ugh, why can't they just do things right? And if you were to actually take a step back and use shades of gray thinking in either of these circumstances, you would have more flexibility and you would find a better balance. You would have more accuracy and you would find a better balance.
Along with giving the other person more grace, kind of like how we talked about giving yourself grace.
When you're using this type of thinking, you tend to be a lot less judgmental of people because you're not seeing them all or nothing, good or bad. You're seeing them for who they really are. We also need to be a little careful with labels. They often remove the nuance from people by considering somebody this trait, this adjective, by saying, you are messy. That removes the nuance of the fact that they might be clean in some areas. Now they're messy in all ways at all times. But a lot of times when we label people that way, that's how we see them. We have them take that trait on in its entirety, and there's no going away from it because they are messy. Well, that's a pretty harsh judgment to just project onto their whole being. We don't want to be like that. We don't want to judge people that harshly, that quickly. See them for who they really are. Give them that grace. Find the balance of who they really are and be more accurate about it.
So this is all really cool, but I've got to ask on the flip side, are there any downsides to this thinking in shades of gray?
So now it feels like we're kind of getting into almost shades of gray on shades of gray, huh?
Ooh, Inception.
Yeah, there's definitely downsides. This is just one perspective, a very helpful perspective, but not in every situation. There are times where shades of gray thinking is not very practical. Shades of gray thinking adds complexity. And as we talked about in the last episode, complexity is the enemy of execution. Do not use shades of gray thinking to avoid taking action. Using shades of gray thinking when you're trying to take action, to do something you know you're supposed to do, just to find the tiny nuance on that thing, isn't really shades of gray thinking. What it's actually doing is using shades of gray as an excuse to put yourself in a state of paralysis by analysis. While shades of gray thinking can be useful in the moment, when you're on a time crunch, you don't have time to be using full-on shades of gray thinking. You need to keep things simple so that you actually do them. In some ways, the first tool from last episode is the opposite of shades of gray thinking. Keep your options small and pick the simplest solution. Well, shades of gray thinking is trying to find the complexities and the nuance in things so that you understand them. So when you're trying to take action, when you're trying to take efficient action, shades of gray thinking isn't nearly as useful. It's more about learning and figuring things out when you're not on a time crunch.
I can think of an example of this. Say you're working in a restaurant and it's a crazy busy Friday night. Someone sends back their burger claiming that it wasn't cooked the way that they wanted it. In that moment when the cooks are just getting slammed, they're not going to stop and dissect that burger and think about, oh, I don't know, this is more medium rare than rare. This is more, like, they're not going to, like, compare and think about it and be like, okay, what's going on with this person? Why did they think that this wasn't medium enough for them when it's clearly medium for me? Like, you're just going to send out another damn burger.
Probably as quick as you can and as accurate as possible.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, it's a great point of how it would be incredibly inefficient to take the time to use shades of gray thinking to find small details. Okay, so here's another one. Do not use shades of gray thinking to judge people for making black and white all or nothing statements. And do not judge black or white all or nothing statements as bad or wrong. It's actually kind of a weird black and white way of doing it. Well, also sort of shades of graying. Just a confusing, unhelpful, unnecessary way of doing it. There are things that are just always bad. To give a direct example, when I said the poison is in the dose, there is no known amount of arsenic that isn't toxic to the human body. Arsenic is always toxic. It's not in the dose. There are exceptions to every rule, which I guess is a shade of gray, but it means that some things are just bad, and you should never do them, or are unhelpful in every situation. And it's okay to judge them as something that you should not do. Clear-cut facts, classifications, and math are often black and white. Somebody is either alive or they're dead. There isn't an in-between. That's not how it works. 2 plus 2 equals 4. 5 minus 2 equals 3. These things are constants. You don't need to figure out the shades of gray. Certain things are just factual and preset. Bears are mammals. Because of the specifications of the way that mammal is defined, bears are always mammals. It's clear-cut. They are. It's a yes. You can use an infinitive there. There are definitely things in life that are black and white. In fact, black and white are on the scale of shades of gray. It is from black to white. They are also shades, and compared to any other super specific shade of gray, black and white are the two most common shades that are going to come up. Obviously not nearly as often as all of the other shades put together, but because of classifications and facts and math, they do come up. When you're asked a question, a clear-cut yes or no question, answer the question. Yes or no questions are often in no need of shades of gray thinking. And the last way that shades of gray thinking might actually limit you in a weird way is by thinking of things as only black, white, or gray. Sometimes it's actually more helpful to view the spectrum as black and white. Every gray is both black and white, just in different proportions. This is actually a more helpful way of finding balance when looking at shades of gray. As opposed to splitting the difference, two things can be very true at the same time, and it's just finding where and how they actually apply, even if they may seem contradictory. The other way it can limit you is by viewing this spectrum as only black and white and gray. Again, but this time I mean there are other colors. Understanding that thinking outside of the box means not even viewing it as a spectrum between those two options, but finding totally different options entirely. Maybe the correct answer isn't a shade of gray, it's green, or blue, or red. Thinking outside of the box means breaking out of that spectrum sometimes, and viewing things that are completely other options that you never would have thought of. And you don't want to limit yourself by excluding those.
It's kind of a beautiful way of thinking that you're like finally giving yourself access to view all of the shades of the rainbow.
Yes. And each one of those colors has a shade, from a super dark of that color to a super light of that color, and so on and so forth in between. Really, it's about shades of gray, different colors, and black and white, and finding how they all fit together. This actually reminds me of a quote from the legal drama Suits, which is currently on Netflix. One of the main characters, who's a lawyer, Harvey Specter, says to Mike Ross, the other main character, "What are your choices if someone puts a gun to your head?" Mike responds, "What are you talking about? You do what they say or they shoot you." Harvey interjects, "Wrong. You take the gun, or you pull out a bigger one, or you call their bluff, or you do one of 146 other things." What he means to say is a lot of times when it seems like there's only two options, there's actually many more. Just because you're in a panicked state doesn't mean that you can't find another way out.
You've been obsessed with that show. I definitely need to see it.
I really like Suits.
All right. Well, tell me this, Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. Have you been applying this shades of gray thinking in previous episodes of your podcast?
Yes. Once again, this is one of the fundamental ways that I view the world. I use this thought process quite a bit. I've tried to touch on the shades of gray for a lot of these different topics, or when I've said nuance, but I'm sure there's some things that I missed even with it, because it's impossible to cover everything about a topic in one go. So let me try and touch on a couple things that I might have missed. Just because something is scary and would require courage, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's something you should do. Jumping off of a cliff with no parachute and no bungee cord would be scary as hell and would require quite a bit of courage in a weird way, but it's a terrible idea. Not all things are good in all situations. Courage isn't always good either. Action, as we kind of touched on, isn't always good. Punching somebody in the face is an action. You shouldn't do that for absolutely no reason. You have to find the nuance with all of these topics. Perspectives of reality. There are many unhelpful perspectives that you can take, and there are many ways that you could use some of the things that I talked about, like the atrocities that Viktor Frankl went through in the concentration camps, to minimize other people's suffering. That is not an okay way to use what I was talking about. You have to find the balance. You have to find the nuance and the shades of gray with some of these topics, because if you take them to their extremes and use them as a stick to beat other people down with, or that they're applicable in every situation, they can be a bad thing too. I've also seen the exact opposite, where people only think about the extreme and use it as an excuse not to take action, to not do some form of personal development, because if taken to the extreme, it could be a bad thing. Therefore, it is a bad thing. This is actually the more common way that I see it used, is to justify not learning or growing, or how a topic is imperfect and therefore we should disregard it entirely. When I'm working with clients, this happens quite a bit, and I have to help them see the shades of gray so that they can understand that being confident and being arrogant are different. Becoming confident does not mean you will become an arrogant jerk. You can find a way to be confident and have humility at the same time. Once again, multiple things can be true simultaneously.
So can we learn how to see the shades of gray?
Yeah, definitely. Nobody's too old. Everyone is capable of doing this if they want to. And now that you have some awareness about how to do it, or like what it is, it's just going to be practice. You're going to have to start trying to find the shades of gray in things. This isn't necessarily going to come naturally to people, but you just have to start exercising it and trying to do it by looking at something and analyzing it and trying to find these different things, the balance, the flexibility, the accuracy.
What are some simple, tangible ways that we can start to see the shades of gray today in our everyday life? How do we get started on reframing our mind that way?
As far as simple, practical ways to adopt this way of thinking, I would say start with curiosity. Remember that this is a great way to learn. Let confusion create curiosity. When you're confused about something, it's an opportunity to learn about it, to find the shades of gray. Stay curious. Curiosity is the fuel for shades of gray thinking. It's what's going to motivate you to do it. Another way is to seek out information that goes against your views. If you already have a very strong view, finding information that is contrary to your own can help you understand different points of view, which are on the other side of the spectrum, which can help you find a better balance.
Which is definitely not easy. Not really wanting to get into religion or politics, but like people who have something that's very dear to them and something that's very ingrained in their identity, it's going to be really challenging to try to understand someone else's perspective or point of view on those close to your heart matters. So there's a lot of strength in being able to do that.
And truly being open to doing it. I mean, hey, you may find that you were dead right the whole time. Like I said, black and white still exists. Or your super dark shade of gray was the right super dark shade of gray. But if you don't actually know the full story, it's hard to have an accurate point of view. We favor the comfort of conviction over the discomfort of doubt. A quote by Adam Grant in his book, Think Again. He's trying to say that it's easier to not rethink things and find the complexity and to just stick with what you already know because it takes less effort. But when we're using shades of gray thinking, we're circumventing that. We're going around it. We're trying to find the truth. Multiple things can be true at the same time, and shades of gray can help us explore all of our options. It's about getting comfortable with uncertainty by defining it. This is why percentages can be useful in shades of gray thinking. If you don't know for sure whether something is going to happen, you can use shades of gray thinking to say, well, there's a 60% chance that it's more like this and 40% that it's like this. You're becoming more comfortable with the uncertainty of not for sure knowing by becoming more certain about the probability and defining it.
Right. Knowing that there's another option out there and the chances of that happening still being substantial. 40% is no joke. That's still a good chance that it's going to fall in that direction.
Yeah, totally. And then you're sort of prepared for both, as opposed to just going, well, 60% is more. It's going to be the 60. You know what? Let's just call it 100. This way, you're more prepared for all of the different things that can happen.
And with that, you're not as thrown off or confused when that 40% does happen. Because I know that for myself, I get stuck in the way that I expect something to happen. And I like that. But when it doesn't go the way that I want it to, or I expected it to, I can have a hard time bouncing back and enjoying the new plan.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Shades of gray thinking can be uncomfortable. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. But shades of gray simultaneously makes you more comfortable with uncertainty and more certain through accuracy. You get the best of both worlds. It's better to define your identity in terms of your values and not your opinions. And when you take a look at an opinion that you formed, ask yourself how you originally formed that opinion. Did you just hear it from somebody? Then maybe it's worth rethinking and finding the shades of gray on it, or finding out that it wasn't true at all in the first place. It's okay to be wrong about things. If you find out you were wrong, you learned something, and you're smarter than you were before. To sum it up, stay curious. Find the shades of gray. Look for accuracy. Look for nuance. Look for balance. Look for flexibility. And see the world in all its different shades.
Well said, babe.
Thanks. Now remember, the information I provide in this podcast is not individualized. It's generally beneficial and helpful, but it isn't specific to your situation. Everyone should look at their own situation and understand how these concepts apply to their own life. Now, if you are looking for personalized advice and are interested in individual coaching, feel free to reach out to me at sagecoachingsolutions@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to the Sage Solutions podcast. Your time is valuable, and I'm so glad you continue to choose to learn and grow here with me. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on more Sage advice. One last thing. The legal language. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. No coaching-client relationship is formed. It is not intended as a substitute for the personalized advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional.